As a Christian, is it healthy? Is it beneficial? You don't open the Bible and there's like Jesus doing Warrior 2. Like, it's not in the Bible, so should we do it? I am someone who tends to live in my head a lot. So yoga is this practice that helps me be in my body. God says our bodies become the temple of God's Spirit. And so yoga helps me remember that and connect with that and sort of get out of my head or out of the I have to feel this emotional high of connectedness to God in order to know that God and I are okay. Many of them have experienced loss of a loved one. And so I think it's so profoundly brave for them to show up in this space and say, as I am in the depths of my pain, I know there's a light, but I'm not sure where it is and how close I am to it, but I know it's there. I'm going to choose to follow this flicker of hope that says, take a step in this direction. And every time God is faithful to meet us there.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Good Grief. Today, I'm excited to dive into a conversation with an incredible yoga instructor, but also Christian and friend over in Seattle, Caroline Williams. And today we're going to be breaking down things to do with our bodies, and especially when going through grief, how movement can help release a whole bunch of stress, tension, anxiety, overwhelm. And that applies to all of us going through grief. So Caroline, welcome to the show. How are you doing out there in Seattle?
Thanks, Ryan. Oh, it is hot and sunny here, which is my favorite time of the year. And I'm pumped to talk to you today.
I'm jealous about the hot part. It's sunny here, but it's cold. I took off one jacket, but I'm keeping on one just to make sure that I don't freeze over here. So jealous. You said you were cold plunging yesterday though. Why cold plunges? I mean, I was cold plunging on the weekend, but why are you attracted to the pain?
Yes. I'm increasing my tolerance for discomfort, which is, yoga teaches us, and I feel like cold plunging is a further invitation to do that. There's, in Seattle, we're surrounded by water, so we have the gift of jumping in freezing cold water year round if we want to.
So good. Hey, random, have you seen orcas or killer whales out your way in Seattle?
Yeah. Just yesterday, we took the ferry up to Victoria, BC. It was like a 3-hour ferry, and we saw orcas on the way up and back.
Oh my god,
it was awesome.
Oh man, I'm a huge Free Willy fan. So, and yes. My brother-in-law lives in Seattle as well. So, I've got to get out there and see some
Amazing.
Orcas. But
Absolutely.
tell me, introduce you and your family. You've got a great little family unit, and we've got a little bub sleeping. You've got a couple of kids. Yeah, tell us about your family and introduce us.
Yeah, my husband and I have been married. We just celebrated 13 years a couple weeks ago.
Congratulations!
And we have thank you. We have a 3.5-year-old daughter named Charlie and an almost 1-year-old son named Anders. So they should be doing their nap and quiet time right now, but you might hear some yelling, and I apologize in advance for that.
I like how the description is you might hear some yelling, and I'm like, yep, that's totally understandable.
Yes.
Super cool. Well, we're here to chat about what you're up to with the Yoga Abbey, which I believe you started pre-pandemic. Is that right? When you kicked off?
Yes.
And then things really started to skyrocket when we were all locked in our homes with no way to exercise. Tell us about how that started, or how you actually. You've been practicing and teaching yoga for some time. Give us a bit of the backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. The Yoga Abbey, we call it an online yoga sanctuary, and that started in 2018. But a couple years before that, I started a YouTube channel where I uploaded Jesus-centered yoga videos. And that started because at the time I was living in New York City, had just become a brand new baby yoga instructor, and felt super passionate about combining faith with yoga. I've loved moving my body forever. I've always found a lot of stress relief and just peace and connection to God through movement. So yoga was always sort of a natural fit for me, but I'd go to these yoga studios that were not Christian, but would find so much connection with God in these spaces that weren't explicitly Christian. And that was sort of mind-blowing in a lot of ways, but it led me down this path of becoming a yoga instructor and teaching yoga. I used to work in politics, so that was a big turn, but started the YouTube channel and was just amazed at how many people I connected with through YouTube versus, I was trying to teach classes in New York and it was hard to get the word out and expensive to rent space and all of that. So
seriously. I mean, on YouTube, from last time I checked, there's like 70,000, 80,000 people following along. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing and deeply humbling that still, like some of the most watched videos are my earliest ones. I'm like, no, there's so many better better classes out there now. But it's just, you offer the best that you have when you have it, and God uses it.
And to be honest, that's how I found you. I was like, quite interested in potentially bringing yoga into our Good Grief community because I'm a 6'4" guy. Yesterday, I went and saw my chiropractor, and we did an evaluation. I've been seeing him for 2 years, and after having a 3-month-old, wanted to see, all right, where is my body at based on holding this baby in all sorts of horrible positions, like as you would know, and I wasn't too far off the mark. However, my hamstrings, they should be about a 90% range, are 50%. So they're really bad. And so you can imagine me in a any yoga position with 50% hamstrings. I've done a couple of classes, and it's safe to say that there were plenty of laughs around the room watching my 6'4" frame tight and twisty. But that led me to going, all right, well, I know that I've experienced some benefits from yoga, and I do need that in my body. I typed into YouTube Christian yoga, and you popped up, and so I'm like, who is Caroline? Like, what is she up to? We've got to chat, and so we've been chatting over the last number of weeks, which has been really, really special. But one of the things that you covered on that channel was, why should Christians do yoga, or should Christians do yoga? And I mean, and in the last month or so, I've really gone on a deep dive on this. I think that 90% of the world or Christians wouldn't ask that question too much, but there's sort of 10% that do go, well, wait on, Christian yoga has come from sort of India, Hindu roots, etc. Should we be practicing it? I'd love to ask you that question, and I know your videos on YouTube go for 15 minutes, but what is your sort of answer today around that question?
Should, for me, is one of those sort of red flag words because it's so subjective. So I'm not going to say, should you or should you not do yoga? I'll give you my pitch.
That's
and
great.
You get to decide if it's the right thing for you. But in terms of, as a Christian, is it healthy? Is it beneficial? If it doesn't, you don't open the Bible and there's like Jesus doing Warrior 2. Like, it's not in the Bible, so should we do it? Or it comes from this place that has different beliefs than Judeo-Christian beliefs. Like, is it still safe? I think the first thing I always come back to is that no one owns my body or breath. I am made in the image of God. And the Bible tells us that God doesn't look at the outside, he looks at what's in our heart. And so if I step on my yoga mat with the intention of drawing near to God, of worshiping God, of uniting my heart with his heart, he's always so good to honor that, right? Jesus is always here with us, and that doesn't change if we step into a yoga studio with statues of Ganesh or we step into a church. Jesus goes with us. God gave us these bodies. Our breath is God-given. And so I think we get to step into those spaces knowing that we don't go alone. But we also step into them with wisdom, right? Like the wisdom of the Holy Spirit goes with us. And I think what has been so sweet about the Yoga Abbey and this community of quote-unquote Christian yoga that's kind of grown over the last few years is people feeling really a safe space to practice as Christians, where they're not, sort of holding apart themselves back or trying to translate what the teacher's saying or filter things, but feel safe to show up as they are. And that would be my first answer.
Oh, so good. And as you're sharing that, I'm thinking, you mentioned statues of Ganesh and so forth. I've been fortunate enough to travel many places in the world, especially Eastern countries. My background is Sri Lankan, and whether it's Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, Japan, you visit these sacred or historical sites and you step into all sorts of temples and monasteries and all sorts of places that worship all sorts of other gods and so forth. And so in my mind, I'm kind of going, well, of course, well, should we just not visit any of these places? Or has God not given us a spirit of fear, but one of power and of sound mind, that when we step into these places, we take the Spirit of God? And so just hearing you share that, I kind of think, oh yeah, for the last like 15 years, 20 years, I've been traveling to all of these places. I mean, the Taj Mahal is a perfect example of a burial place for his wife that is also, draped in many different religions and cultures. But it's one of the wonders of the world that we all flock to.
Yes.
But we don't ask, should we go there as a Christian, right?
Right. I mean, you're not going there to pay homage to the deities that are worshipped there.
That's right.
Right? You're going there out of respect, out of curiosity, and even I think out of a sense of awe and wonder. Like, wow, look at what humans made. Like, how creative we are and how beautiful we can be. And going and celebrating those things, I think, can be a way of celebrating also the beauty of God.
So good. So, I mean, like, have you had to, do you have to answer this question, every time you step on camera or, to teach your audience or to speak on social media? Is that a question that really comes up quite a lot for you?
It does. I think that people who eventually have the courage to reach out have sort of settled for themselves, even if they can't articulate why, this okayness with yoga. And I think they're sort of looking for maybe not permission, but like, this feels really good to me and I feel drawn to it and I feel this connection with God, but is that okay?
Sure.
Because if I Google things, I see a bunch of weird stuff, and now I'm not.
Oh, there's so much.
Really sure, and I'm not sure what other people say.
There is so much weird stuff, and like since I've been diving into this rabbit hole, like my Instagram feed is now coming up with like ex-Hindu yoga teachers talking about how they've come to the faith, and like you've got to learn to discern, I guess, for yourself. Yeah. Yes. And I mean,
and that's real.
Totally,
like who am I to say no? Your experience is wrong, and that's not true.
That's right. I went to some of our sort of mentors in the faith and I asked them, and thankfully they dealt with this question back in the 80s. And I was like, like, tell me about this. And they essentially said, in their church, people wanted to practice yoga and they went to the pastor and said, how do we deal with this? He asked them one question. He said, does it point you towards the cross or away from the cross? And I was like, that's the question right there that we need to ask about everything in our lives. And so chatting with you over the last few weeks, I know that it points you towards the cross, but can you share how stepping on that mat and performing the yoga exercises but connecting with God does that?
Such a good question. I am someone who tends to live in my head a lot. And so yoga is this practice that helps me be in my body. And I think we live in a culture and even a faith culture that's so heavily influenced by Greco-Roman thoughts about the body, which say, oh, the body is just, Kate Ballard calls it like a meat sack to carry around my brain. My brain is the superior thing and my body just kind of gets drug along for the journey. And we've interpreted passages of scripture to sort of support that by saying like, oh, this body is just, I can't wait to be done with it so that I can finally get this perfect heavenly one. And so I'm just going to reject everything that's physical. But that flies in the face of the heart of Christianity, which says that God doesn't stay this, ethereal deity. God isn't a star. He's not an avatar like in Hinduism. He becomes human. And he lives in a human body and he dies in a human body. And then he's resurrected in a human body with scars on him. That's the good body that he gets after he's resurrected. And so these bodies aren't something to be rejected or dismissed or demeaned, but to be embraced, because that's what God does in the form of Jesus. And so yoga helps me remember that my body is not something to be used towards a goal, something to be punished, something to be worshipped, but something to be embraced as this is the place where I get to know God. And God says, when he imparts the Holy Spirit onto his disciples before he transcends into heaven, our bodies become the temple of God's Spirit now. It's not somewhere else we have to go to be with God, but it's these bodies. And so yoga helps me remember that and connect with that and sort of get out of my head or out of the I have to feel this emotional high of connectedness to God in order to know that God and I are okay or healing's happening or whatever. But by simply stepping on my mat and connecting with my breath and moving my body with a sense of awareness and mindfulness, just helps me move out of that head space and into a much more embodied, grounded space.
So good. And it's the same going for a nice walk or exercising the gym.
Absolutely.
Or playing sport. There are times when sport you're not really connecting with God. You're trying to beat the other team or the other competitor. But in some of those more, solemn, quieter exercise routines, that's where I really connect with God. And I ask God when I'm out for a walk, what do you want to say to me today? What do you have for me? And so I can totally see from a yoga standpoint, that's a perfect place to be doing that. And to think about our bodies, that we house the Spirit of God and that we get to partner with Him through exercise and movement. I just think it's incredible. So what have you seen when it comes to yourself personally? I mean, am I right in assuming you experienced yoga first with God and realized how powerful that was? What have you seen personally before you then said, all right, I want to take this to more people?
Yeah. I encountered God. I mentioned I used to work in politics, and but that was what the plan for my life. I knew from a young age that's what I wanted to study in school. It's what I wanted to do, and I was doing the thing, and I was miserable. And
I've been there. Totally get it.
Existential crisis. Who am I? What am I doing with my life? And it was going to church and doing all the things that I had been taught to do, that I would then expect this outcome from God, right? Okay, God, I'm doing these things, so you're going to do these things, and those things were give me direction, give me happiness, give me purpose, whatever. And I was doing all those things and just feeling really lost and lonely. And I'd go to these yoga classes in these yoga studios, like I said, that weren't Christian, and get to the end of class, and you lie in this shape called Shavasana, which is Sanskrit for corpse pose, which I really love because you lie there, stillness, pretending to be dead, which also feels full of imagery as a Christian,
Sure.
But I would just weep because I felt God's presence and voice so strongly, just reminding me the truth of who I am, which is, do you know how much I love you? Do you know how proud I am of you? And here I am trying to reach for all these answers or all these things. And God says, the most important is that you just remember how much I love you. And so I feel like it became really foundational for my faith as this way of, connecting with God isn't done by doing, but being. And yoga helped me be with myself and be with God, who is always with us, and not sort of build my faith around all the things that I'm doing for God.
That's so good. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there being. It's a huge part of our walk, with God, when we get so confused around doing. And I mean, here we are, we're chatting on a podcast where many listening are going through grief and loss. And what we feel like we need to do is to do things. We need to do certain things to then find respite and find peace and etc. when God calls us to be. But it's often the hardest thing when you've lost someone or gone through some form of loss to just be. And so I'd like to ask you a question, because I mean, you've seen thousands of people on, you've coached and taught thousands of people on their mats from all over the world. Have you had people come through that have gone through grief and loss and trauma? Have you, specifically heard of stories of transformation and what that has released in their life?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I could tell you stories for days. We, as part of the Yoga Abbey, we have a teacher training program, which is where we really get to know people and their journeys as they train to become Christ-centered yoga instructors. And many of those who enroll in our program are recovering from disordered eating patterns, depression, anxiety. Many of them have experienced loss of a loved one, a sense of purposelessness, are recovering from abuse of all kinds. And so I think it's so profoundly brave for them to show up in this space and say, as I am, in the depths of my pain, I know there's a light, but I'm not sure where it is and how close I am to it, but I know it's there. And I'm going to choose to follow this like flicker of hope that says, take a step in this direction. And that might be take a step onto the mat, take a step into this training program or whatever. And every time God is faithful to meet us there. And I think that, I don't know why, but it surprises us every time. You know, like, oh, really? Is this easy? But it's so hard, like you said, the being still part of it. Like, we want to keep going and doing, and Jesus is so relaxed, and waiting for us to slow down and be still and not in a hurry, so that He can really speak to us. And I think yoga can open up that space to us. There's so many different styles of yoga, and everyone sort of finds their own way in. But in my own practice and in the Yoga Abbey, I started as like a power yogi, like give me hot, give me sweaty, give me hard. I want to get a good workout in. And now my yoga practice is so slow and much more fluid. And that's, I think, been true of many people in our community as they've discovered, oh, I don't have to run so hard and so fast to keep up with God. Like the pace of love is really much slower and unhurried. And then as we do that and we settle in and we make space for that, I think we experience, like, God's not in a rush to heal us either. And I say that, I'm like, oh, is that what I meant to say? He's not rushing us in our healing process. Let's say it that way. There's not a destination that He's like, come on, let's just get there so we can move on. You know, like He's with us in the slow every moment.
Yeah, I think there's a few things there that really just struck a chord with me when you said that your journey there of how you started hard and fast, and then it's now become this slow burn, if I can call it that. And I was just thinking, like, that's how we start relationships. You know, your husband, you know, my wife. You know, when I started, I'll speak for myself. When we started dating, you know, it was all on. You know, we wanted to talk at 100 miles an hour and do 100 things at once and see each other 23 hours out of the day. And over time, that grows where you can just sit with each other and be. And that's been quality time. It doesn't have to be filled with all of the stuff. And so I can totally see how that makes sense from a yoga standpoint. What are the benefits of yoga? And I won't put any words in your mouth, but what are some of the benefits?
Yeah. I mean, there are study after study showing it's helpful in relieving stress and lowering anxiety, lowering blood pressure, building like physical strength and stability, which I think especially as we age, that's so important. And people think, you know, to do yoga, I have to be young and fit and be able to touch my toes or balance well. And it's called a yoga practice, not a yoga performance, right? So like being able to touch your toes is not a prerequisite to step on your mat. But as we age, you know, building up that strength continues to be important. I think what you were just saying, how you've noticed your relationship with your wife change, and now you can just be with her without trying to move hard and fast all the time. To me personally, that's been the most profound gift that I have uniquely found through yoga, which is this ability to sit and just be with myself and then be with God and then be with others, right? Like I can just sit with my husband and my children and my friends and not have an agenda or like always feeling like we have to be on the go, but we can just enjoy each other's company, and that's enough. And I think in our world, and especially in Western Christianity, we've built so much of, we measure our faith and our faithfulness and God's faithfulness by accomplishment and action and activity. But but that's not what we see Jesus model with his friends.
Yeah.
And I think pre-yoga, like sitting down and praying or having a quiet time was like so anxiety inducing. And I constantly felt like a failure because I was like, I can't concentrate for longer than like 3 minutes, And so Bible study becomes, or time with God becomes Bible study because that's something to do. And that's not bad. But if that's the only way you know how to relate to God or to your spouse or a friend or even yourself, it's exhausting. So I think the biggest benefit that yoga is giving me is really helping me learn to be still and not have to fill the space.
It's so good. I was just going to share, the scripture that came to mind, be still and know that I am God. And
Yes.
you just finished there by saying, be still. And so I think that's so perfect. And, coming back to sort of grief, and one of the hardest things can be to be still, because one, our minds are just racing at 100 miles an hour, we're trapped in thinking about the person that we lost, but then also not wanting to think about them because of the pain that it brings and surfaces for us. And then having to do all of the rest of our life while we're trying to manage all of the things that have felt like they're falling apart. What have you noticed by your students, taking time to focus and be still? In terms of their mind, like with a busy mind, yoga seems like the complete opposite of a busy mind. It's about settling those thoughts or maybe concentrating or aligning some of those thoughts. Maybe what do you teach in that regard, or what have you seen in that aspect, especially for people going through trauma, loss?
Such a good question. 2 things come to mind. The first is that I think yoga and the meditating or contemplative prayer can feel really overwhelming at first for the reasons you just said. Like, my mind is racing all the time, and now I'm supposed to just sit in silence for 5 minutes. Like, 5 minutes doesn't seem like that long, and then you sit there and you look at the clock and it's been 10 seconds, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm done. There's no way I'm going to make it to 5 minutes.
I totally know that
and
feeling.
So I think, yes. And so what I practice, what we teach, and the fruit that I've seen from practicing it was, first of all, like, this is a practice, right? So if all I can do today is 10 seconds, 10 seconds is what I can do, and that's enough.
I think that's such a great reminder.
Can I begin to build?
That's it. Yeah. Even just for me, like, just hearing it, because I hear yoga, I don't hear yoga practice. So even just going, it's a practice. It's a practice.
Yes.
I'm just got my training wheels on.
Yes, totally. And what I try and cultivate, like, really practically, is, can I build a little bit of space between the thought, or between me and the thought? So I am not the thought. The thought is something that I can look at, right? And so there's lots of super great like learn to meditate tools out there that teach some version of this. But, imagine you're sitting on the side of the road and you're watching cars pass, and those cars are your thoughts, right? Like, I'm not in the car driving it, but I can just remove myself slightly and sit there and notice, like, okay, there goes that memory. There goes that to-do list item. There goes that, like, itch on my back. And I'm not identifying completely with it, but can I, even just for a moment, find a little bit of space and then choose, okay, am I going to follow that, or am I going to sit and just let it pass? Because it will pass. It always does. But we get so caught up in it, we let it pull us along for the ride. So can I just sit and watch it for a moment and notice, okay, I can be as this wave of emotion comes and it crests and then it goes. And I might watch 3 of those. I might watch 300 of those, but I don't have to get carried away the whole time. And I think it's like a muscle that you start to build, and you might start with a 1 pound weight, and in 2 years' time, it might be a 10 pound weight. But a little bit every day helps build that muscle of just spaciousness, right? And then I think hearing the voice of God, hearing the voice of love, being able to just take a deep breath and feel grounded for one moment becomes just a little bit more accessible.
Oh, that is so good. I can imagine it kind of like a seesaw, in a sense, that speaking to our grief audience is like when we're in that space, it's quite heavy, it's like one person on a seesaw, and you're weighed down by these thoughts, and all of these memories and everything that just floods our mind. But as we begin to practice, as you say, the elements of yoga and separating ourselves from those thoughts, which I love that analogy of the cars going past, as we begin to practice that, slowly that weight starts to shift on the seesaw to eventually the point where it's either equal or the other side, where we're able to disconnect from those thoughts and hear the voice of God so much more clearer when we feel like God's nowhere to be seen sometimes in our grief, because our minds are just full of everything. That's so brilliant. Is it somewhat like that in the transference? It takes time and practice before you start maybe hearing from God more, or experiencing a bit more peace in yoga rather than chaos?
Yeah, I think a really important thing to hold as you're sitting and practicing, like, can I create just a little bit of space here, is compassion. And it's so easy, because you will, right? You see one car go by and you're like, yes, nailed it, didn't chase that one. But then the next one goes, and all of a sudden 30 seconds later, you're thinking about what you're going to eat next. And you're and failure, shame, frustration, I'm just going to quit. Like, this is too hard, I can't do it. And it's that moment where you say, oh no, there I go again. I'm going to come back. I'm going to sit in the seat. Jesus is right next to me. He's not mad. He's not frustrated. Like, he knows, he's so patient. And so can I be patient and compassionate with myself? And I think building that sense of self-compassion and kindness then makes it possible to keep at the practice rather than feeling like this is way too hard and it's not for me.
So good. I love that idea of compassion and that Jesus is sitting next to us. Is that something you regularly, I don't know what you're sharing now in terms of that's a regular thing you ask your members to think about?
Yeah. There are many different ways to meditate, or in the Christian tradition, we sort of call it contemplative prayer practices. And for centuries, different saints have been practicing variations of this. And some will say, nope, you just sit in silence. Like, you don't even hold on to a word or image or phrase, right? And this is typically what we think of when we think of meditation as Christians, like, emptying our minds. And that feels a little overwhelming and very hard to do. But plenty of Christian teachers talk about using something like a sacred word or an image that you might return to, kind of like a mantra, right? So maybe it's peace. When I notice that I've started chasing that car, peace is the word I come back to, and I remember Jesus is here with me. Or maybe it's an image, right? Like, and that image is Jesus on the bench next to me. And that's just what helps anchor my thoughts. And it's true. And it's just a helpful grounding thing. And I can take it with me, yes, I might have a 5-minute seated meditation practice, but I also have it while I'm washing the dishes or walking the dog or swaying a baby to sleep.
Yes, especially while swaying a baby to sleep. Can attest to that. It's so cool. You got me thinking there and reminded me that, one of the tools that we've created inside of our world is, what we know as breath prayers. And you've touched on it just there in terms of simple scripture-based prayer that we can use as we inhale and exhale through scripture. And so I love those different forms of meditation. And the Bible says to meditate on the word. And so I think just some of these things that we're talking about are kind of under that taboo topic of like Christian meditation, Christian yoga, And so breaking down these boundaries and barriers are so good. And so meditation, whether you align with the word or not, we meditate on stuff all the time, whether you say you do or not. You meditate on like what you're going to have for dinner. You might think about that. And all it means is you're thinking about it over and over and you're just looping some of those thoughts. So really powerful to connect that idea of Christ, meditating on him alone, scripture, but then combining that with some form of movement, in today's case, yoga. How do you, I assume there's routine when you get people to enter the practice of yoga, but how do you know where to take things from a movement side, but also from a spiritual side as well?
Yeah, it was such a good question. the challenge of online yoga is that it is harder to say, you come in and you might say like, hey, I'm new to yoga and my hamstrings are really tight. I don't know that, when you click play on my
Sure.
video. So the practice that you do may or may not be the best for your body in that moment. And so I think we always say, even in in-person class or an online class, listen to your body, listen to your body, listen to your body. And that's helpful, but can feel very foreign and hard because we're really not taught or encouraged to do that in culture today. But beginning to develop that attentiveness and awareness, I think starting from a place of compassion, and beginning to notice like, okay, when I'm doing this movement or this shape, I'm feeling a lot of discomfort. And is this pain or is this just, I haven't moved this way in a long time? And typically movement practices historically have been, like find your edge and push past it, right? Like pain is gain. And so we tend to approach movement from that perspective,
Totally,
which is not encouraged in yoga. And I think increasingly in other movement practices, we're starting to move away from that. But especially not so in yoga. So we get curious about where that edge is for our body and then make a choice in that moment out of love, right? Not out of performance or duty or this is what the person next to me is doing, so I have to do it too. Am I going to take this farther and deeper, or am I just going to stay where I am? We always encourage people, like, can you breathe well in this shape? Or are you like holding your breath, clenching every muscle in your body, just waiting for that moment to be over? That's a sign that your body is saying, nope, you've gone too far. This isn't safe or good for you today. So find the space where you can take a deep breath in. It might feel like hard work and your breath might be kind of fast, but you can also sort of, in yoga, we call it like there's this balance between strength and steadiness. Or steadiness and ease, right? So can I find ease in this shape or this movement, even if it is challenging me? If not, then that's my cue that I've gone too far and I should back off.
Good cue. I feel like my body just screams when I get into positions, and so I think I'd have to practice that balance of ease and steadiness and figuring out where it sits. And then what about from the spiritual side?
Helpful.
Oh yeah, totally.
From the spiritual side, sort of like how to enter in, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, and like, I mean, if you're teaching a live online class or a live in-person class, when you're guiding people through, you've got a set plan, but are you able, do you take that outside of the framework? Sometimes if you feel the spirit prompting you, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, good question. So when I teach, and what we teach in our students in the Yoga Abbey is to teach with a lot more questions than answers. So it's not, like my time to preach a sermon to you while also cueing movement.
Totally.
But I'm here really as a space holder. Yeah. I don't always do the best job. I love to talk, so I constantly have to rein it in.
Sorry to interrupt. It's so funny. We're
Okay.
working our way through The Chosen, and just seeing Jesus's humor with the disciples, but also Gentiles and everybody else. And I think the last episode we watched, he gets up and everyone's got questions around him, and they're saying, you've got to be answerable for this and for that. And the Arabs are asking him questions, the Jews are asking him questions, and he says, "Let me share a story." And they all groan and go, another story. And he says, us Jews have a habit of asking more questions than we do, giving answers. And so I love that you've just led in with that exact prompt of that we lead with questions. So yeah, carry on. I just thought that was so good.
It is. And I should know the number, but I don't, like he answers, like less than 5 questions, but asks hundreds of them. People ask him for an answer and he often responds with a question. So that's how we approach it as well, because I don't know what you're stepping on your mat with. I don't know if you've just lost a loved one 2 weeks ago and this is the first time you've actually stopped to breathe for 2 weeks. I don't know if you just had a fight with your spouse in the car before you came here. And so we ask a lot of questions, and we use the image of the tabernacle in the Old Testament kind of as this blueprint for drawing near to God. The tabernacle is sort of this first place we see post-Eden, God say, I'm not going to stay separate from you. I'm going to dwell among you, right? And then we see it again in Jesus, and now we see it with us and the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit. But the tabernacle lays out this really beautiful blueprint of approaching the divine in the Holy of Holies. And so we sort of use that for inspiration. And the first part of class is really just a lot about grounding, like becoming aware of how you're showing up today, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and building that sense of awareness so that as class does start to pick up and get more challenging, we might know, like, okay, I'm feeling really tender today. And so pushing really hard in this part of class isn't really what I feel like God invited me into. And I've built that awareness already. And then we move into this space of laying down something heavy, because almost always we step onto our mats holding on to something that we want to let go of. Right. And that might just be for this 20-minute class. I've been ruminating on this memory all day, and I'm going to just set it aside for now. And I can pick it up when I'm done, but for these next 20 minutes, I'm going to put it here. Or I'm going to get in a Christian class, Jesus, I'm giving it to you. And I trust you to hold it with all love and compassion for the next half hour. And now that our hands are a little bit more open and we're feeling a little bit lighter, God, what do you have for me now? Right? Is it more of your peace? Is it joy? Is it just a word of encouragement to keep going? And then in the last part of class, we sort of start to wind down. And I think we're invited in the tabernacle. This is we liken it to the holy place, which you lift this other curtain and you step in, and it's dark and it's fragrant and it's candlelit and it's all your senses, the psalmist says, taste and see that I am good. And so in this part of the yoga class, as we start to wind down, a lot of emotion tends to come up as we slow down. And because we've moved through all these things. This, I think, is the wisdom of yoga, right? The physical practice of yoga really was birthed out of these hermits' desire to meditate and transcend their bodies. And they realized, I can't just sit and do that. I have to move for a little bit first. And so we move and stuff comes up, right? Feelings get dislodged and emotion comes up, and emotions need motion. And so we watch that come and go. And then as we start to cool down in the practice, I think there's just this gift of being able to be more fully present with ourselves and with God. And for me and for many of our students, this then leads us into just an easy place of worship. I can now genuinely say, God, you are good. Whereas I might have said that at the beginning of class, but it was more in my head than in my body, So I'm able to enter to that space of worship more truly. And then just rest with God. I mentioned Shavasana earlier, corpse pose, and I like to liken to the seventh day of creation, right? You work, and then you rest. And that's the last part of class. I'm just with you, God. I'm not trying to ask you any more questions or get any more information or do the right thing with my body. I'm just going to be. And more often than not, that's when the tears really come, when we hear God's voice clear, because we're just listening. And God's always so good to meet us.
So good. I love that tabernacle blueprint analogy. I think that's just incredible in terms of how you set your sessions up with. And I also loved how you said emotions need motion. I think that's so true as well. When they're bottled up inside of us with nowhere to go, that's when we feel all sorts of, all sorts of bad. So powerful. And then I like that idea of resting on the seventh day, that final pose, Shavasana, I think it's called. And I think there's many images that come to mind as well, at that point in time too. It makes me right now want to get my TV on and get into some yoga to kick off my day. I think it's so cool. What would you say to people listening in who have never tried yoga and are curious about it, and after this conversation they're kind of I would like to experience that connection with God that Caroline's mentioned, or that separation of my thoughts, or just getting my body starting to move and process some of those emotions? What would you say to somebody that hasn't really stepped into yoga before?
I've been wanting to, I want to give this disclaimer before we go any further, which is, especially talking to this audience, which many of your listeners, like you've said, have experienced some kind of loss, personal loss, and wherever you are in that journey, however heavy that grief feels in this moment, yoga is not some magic wand that, like, oh, I step on my mat and it's lifted, right? It goes with us. And actually, yoga and meditation can sometimes be really quite triggering, because now we're stopping and we're slowing down and we're being still, and that flood of thoughts or that spike of emotion hits. Like, that's super common. And so just know that whether you're online or you're in person at a studio, that if you feel really triggered like that, it's not because you're doing something wrong or you're not meant to be there. It's really normal, and do what serves you best in that moment. So if closing your eyes, for example, feels too overwhelming, don't close your eyes. Keep them open. If it's more helpful for you to like lie in Shavasana, for example, a lot of our students will stack blankets on top of their bodies to feel that sense of weightedness, to help them feel more grounded, and that can feel really safe. Or even doing Shavasana lying on your side rather than on your back. And all of these are just ideas to know that if in that moment you're like, this is too much and I feel overwhelmed, open your eyes, shake your body, find a prop to help ground you. Follow the intuition of your body, because it's telling you, like, I've got something to express here in this moment, and I don't have to just sit and be still. Sometimes that can make it worse than better. So
that's great.
I want to just throw that out there. So
awesome disclaimer. Awesome disclaimer.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that's you, like, grief and trauma and that pain feels really heavy, if it's possible in your community to find a class or online that is more trauma sensitive, that can be a really sweet and smooth way in, because these instructors are trained with lots of really practical tools like that to help make a space where you, that might feel safer than if you were to step into a class in your local gym. So know that that's an option out there. In the Yoga Abbey, we teach, all of our instructors teach from a trauma-informed lens, which means we try to give lots of options for shapes, give lots of agency, give lots of choice. So there's that.
That's so good.
Yeah. And then where to start is just start small and set the bar really low for yourself. We're so much more inclined to come back to something and do it again if we feel like we're doing it well. So like 10 minutes today, 12 minutes tomorrow. And I think letting go of all of these shoulds. I should look a certain way. My body should move a certain way. I should feel this thing in this moment. I should hear from God. Let all of that go. What will be. And that doesn't change God's presence with you. My mentor, Dr. Alicia Britt Jolie, always says that there is nothing we can do to thicken God's presence or thin God's presence. God just is with us, and doing yoga isn't going to make more of God's presence with us. It helps us attune to what already is. And so so be really kind with yourself at whatever that looks like. And like I said at the beginning, God honors the intentions of our heart, right? So wherever you are, if it's in person or online, we step in and we say, God, I'm here. You've given me this body. You give me this breath. I'm here to draw near to you. And God meets us.
Love that. I just had this thought that, like, this conversation for somebody listening is so perfect if they're interested in yoga, because now they can step into, like you've just shared, they can step into a local studio, one, and check, are they trauma informed or is it trauma sensitive? But two, also, if they already are at a studio somewhere, they can take these practices of connecting with God onto their mat wherever they are, which I just think is so powerful. So thank you for that. Secondly, if people want to come and hang out with you in the Yoga Abbey, what's the best way to do that? And I'll make it happen.
We'd love that. Yeah. TheYogaAbbey.com, ABBEY, is our website. We are a membership community. We have monthly membership. You can cancel at any time. So we've got yoga practices from 15 to 60 minutes. Power flow if you're like, I'm here to sweat, or slow flow if you're like, I just want to move a little bit. We've got a whole bunch of instructors from around the world. I teach, and a team of other instructors teach as well. We've also got Lectio Divina and contemplative prayer practices, devotional resources. And then if you want to practice for free, you can find me on YouTube at Caroline Williams Yoga.
So good. That's where I found you. Caroline, this has been awesome, and we're really blessed to have you in our world, and excited to have you inside of our Good Grief Club at some point to speak to our community as well. This has been really cool. It's encouraged me, and also probably inspired me to pull out the yoga mat. It's tucked away somewhere in our house, and probably get started with a few of your videos on YouTube first. So I'll put all the links to the Yoga Abbey and your YouTube account, your Instagram, all below, so everyone can connect with you. This has been really fun. I'd love to do more of this, and explore more yoga and movement, so that all of us going through grief with that tension in our body can release it in different ways. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
You.
It's been amazing.
Thank you. And thanks for making the space for this and for your curiosity and boldness. And I think it gives your listeners and followers permission to be curious as well. And that's such a gift. So I appreciate you and the space, and I'm grateful to be connected to all of you.
You're so welcome. Hey, if you've enjoyed this episode, we hope you have. Feel free to share it with someone. That's all we ask. These types of conversations help break down barriers. They help open up conversations, and they help us process grief. So from Kaylee and myself, we want to say big love to you guys. We're praying for you, and we'll see you on the next episode real soon. Bye for now.